The Zephyrian research facility hummed with the constant buzz of alien technology, its crystalline walls reflecting the pale blue light that bathed the entire complex. Dr. Vexistar adjusted his six-fingered hands over the holographic display, watching the vital signs of their most valuable specimen fluctuate dangerously. The creature lying in the containment cell was unlike anything the Galactic Council had encountered before, a being they had classified as Subject Kira 9. Though she had whispered her real name to the few who bothered to listen, Kira was what humans might call fox-like, but that comparison would fall desperately short. Her sleek silver-blue fur seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and her amber eyes held an intelligence that made even the most seasoned Zephyrian scientists uncomfortable. She was roughly the size of a large dog, but her movements carried a grace and precision that spoke of a predator evolved far beyond earthly comprehension. Most unsettling of all were the four small bundles of fur huddled against her weakened form. Her pups, barely old enough to open their eyes. The facility had captured Kira 3 months ago from a derelict space station orbiting a dying star. The station had been listed as abandoned for over 2 centuries, a relic from some long-forgotten conflict. When the salvage teams found her, she was barely alive, protecting her newborn offspring in a makeshift den constructed from twisted metal and salvaged thermal blankets. The initial reports described her as docile due to malnutrition, an assessment that would prove catastrophically wrong. Dr. Vexitar had been assigned to study her unique physiology. Her cellular structure was unlike anything in their databases, capable of rapid regeneration, immune to most toxins, and showing signs of what could only be described as controlled molecular manipulation. When tissue samples were taken, they regrew within hours. When exposed to various atmospheric conditions, her body adapted almost instantly. Most remarkable was her brain activity, which showed patterns indicating not just sentience, but a form of intelligence that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. The pups were equally extraordinary. Each one exhibited slightly different characteristics. One seemed to phase partially out of visual spectrum, another showed signs of electromagnetic manipulation, a third demonstrated gravity-defying movements, and the fourth appeared to process information at speeds that overloaded their monitoring equipment. The research team theorized that Kira's species might be artificially enhanced, possibly the result of some ancient genetic engineering project. But as weeks passed, Kira's condition deteriorated. The sterile environment, the constant testing, and the separation from any natural habitat were taking their toll. Her fur lost its luminescence, her movements became sluggish, and most concerning of all, she had stopped eating. The pups, dependent on their mother's milk, were beginning to weaken as well. Dr. Vextar tried various nutritional supplements, environmental adjustments, and even attempted to replicate what they thought might be her natural diet. But nothing worked. The breakthrough came when junior researcher Thisal made an unauthorized observation. Working a late shift, she noticed that Kira's condition improved slightly whenever the facility's primary power core cycled through its maintenance phase. During these brief periods when the electromagnetic field that contained her was at its weakest, Kira seemed more alert, more responsive. Thisal began to suspect that their containment methods weren't just holding Kira prisoner. They were slowly killing her. Her species, Thisal theorized, might be naturally attuned to specific energy frequencies, possibly feeding off cosmic radiation or stellar emissions rather than conventional matter. The facility's shielding, designed to protect sensitive equipment from space radiation, was essentially starving their subjects. When she brought this theory to Dr. Vextar, he dismissed it as the speculation of an inexperienced researcher. The testing would continue as scheduled. Unknown to the research team, Kira understood far more than they realized. Her species possessed not just intelligence, but a form of collective consciousness that allowed them to share thoughts and memories across vast distances. She had been calling out, sending distress signals through quantum fluctuations that her captors' instruments couldn't detect. Her people had thought her dead when her original ship was destroyed, but now they knew better, and they were answering her call. The Zephyrians had made several critical errors in their assessment of their prisoner. They assumed that because Kira appeared weakened, she was harmless. They failed to recognize that her apparent docility was actually careful observation, as she studied their technology, their routines, and their weaknesses. Most importantly, They underestimated the bonds between her and her offspring. In their clinical detachment, they saw the pups as merely additional test subjects rather than recognizing them as the key to Kira's true power. As the artificial day cycle dimmed to simulate night, Kira lay in her containment cell, her breathing shallow but her mind sharp. She could feel her pups' distress, their confusion at their unnatural surroundings. Through their shared consciousness, she began to teach them, preparing them for what was to come. The Zephyrians thought they were studying a dying animal and her helpless young. They had no idea they were keeping the galaxy's most sophisticated weapon and her 4 apprentices in a cage that was about to prove woefully inadequate. The security monitors showed nothing unusual that night. Just a mother and her babies growing weaker by the day. Dr. Vextar approved the next day's testing schedule, including more invasive procedures that he believed might yield better data before their subjects expired. He went to sleep thinking about the research papers he would publish, the accolades he would receive for his work on this unique species. He had no way of knowing that this would be his last peaceful night for a very long time. The first sign of trouble came at 0347 hours when the facility's quantum detection grid registered an impossible reading. Something was approaching the research station, but it wasn't showing up on conventional sensors. The object seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, phasing in and out of detectable space like a ghost ship riding the cosmic winds. Night Supervisor Krelvik stared at the readings, his 4 eyes blinking in confusion as he tried to make sense of the data. The approaching vessel defied every known law of physics. It appeared to be constructed from materials that bent light around themselves, creating a visual distortion that made direct observation nearly impossible. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that they were witnessing technology that predated their civilization by millions of years. Kira's people, the Voidhounds, were among the oldest sapient species in the galaxy, and their mastery of dimensional manipulation was beyond anything the younger races could comprehend. Captain Sixra stood on the bridge of the Voidhound ship Stellar Fang, her own fox-like features set in grim determination. Unlike Kira's silver-blue coloring, Sixra's fur was deep black with streaks of starlight silver, marking her as a Voidwalker, one of the elite warriors capable of surviving in the vacuum of space without protection. Her amber eyes glowed with an inner fire as she received the weak quantum signals from her pack-sister trapped below. The rescue ship carried 12 Voidhounds, each one a master of different combat disciplines. There was Zephal, whose claws could slice through molecular bonds, Nixera, who could become completely invisible by bending light, and Vordash, whose roar could shatter crystal and disrupt electronic systems. They had been searching for Kira for months, following quantum trails across half the galaxy. The thought of their pack-sister dying in captivity while protecting her young filled them with a cold rage that promised terrible consequences for her captors. Back in the facility, Kira sensed the approach of her people. Her weakened body suddenly surged with new energy as she connected with the familiar quantum signatures of her pack. Through their shared consciousness, she began transmitting detailed information about the facility's layout, security systems, and the location of her pups. But she also sent another message, a warning. The Zephyrians had been conducting experiments not just on her, but on tissue samples from her pups. They had been trying to replicate Voidhound abilities, and some of their experiments had yielded disturbing results. Dr. Vextar was awakened by the facility's emergency alarm system. The quantum distortion readings were off the charts, and their long-range scanners had finally detected something that shouldn't exist, a ship that seemed to be made of crystallized space itself. He rushed to the command center where chaos was beginning to reign. The facility's AI was reporting system failures throughout the complex, as if something was interfering with their technology at a fundamental level. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that Voidhound technology was grown rather than built. Their ships were living entities, symbiotic organisms that had evolved alongside their creators. The Stellar Fang wasn't just approaching the research facility, it was studying it, learning its weaknesses and preparing to exploit them. The quantum interference wasn't random. It was a sophisticated attack that targeted the facility's most critical systems. Supervisor Krelvik tried to raise the facility's shields, but the control systems weren't responding properly. The defensive grid that should have protected them from any attack was being systematically dismantled by an intelligence that understood their technology better than they did themselves. Panic began to spread through the research teams as they realized they were facing something beyond their comprehension. In her containment cell, Kira began to change. The approaching presence of her pack triggered physiological responses that the Zephyrians had never observed. Her fur began to glow again, but this time with patterns that seemed to move and shift like living constellations. Her amber eyes brightened until they cast shadows on the walls of her cell. Most dramatically, her size began to increase, as her body shifted into what her people called war form, a combat configuration that allowed voidhounds to channel cosmic energies directly. The pups responded to their mother's transformation. The one who had shown electromagnetic abilities began generating small lightning arcs between its paws. The gravity-manipulating pup started floating several inches off the ground. The phase-shifting youngster flickered in and out of visibility, and the fourth pup's eyes began glowing with the same pattern-shifting light as its mother's fur. They were no longer helpless babies. They were becoming weapons. Dr. Vextar watched in horror as his specimens transformed before his eyes. The containment field that had held them for months was beginning to crack under the pressure of energies it wasn't designed to handle. Emergency protocols activated throughout the facility as automated systems tried to compensate for the massive power fluctuations. But nothing in their programming had prepared them for this scenario. Captain Sixra felt the moment when Kira's transformation completed. Through their quantum link, she could sense her pack sister's renewed strength and growing rage. The Voidhounds had always been protective of their young, but what the Zephyrians had done, kidnapping a mother and her newborn pups, subjecting them to months of experimentation and slow starvation, had crossed every line of civilized behavior. The stellar fang finally materialized fully in normal space, its crystalline hull reflecting the light of distant stars in impossible ways. It was beautiful and terrifying, a work of art that could annihilate planets. The research facility's remaining sensors registered its presence as something roughly the size of a small moon, though its actual dimensions seemed to shift depending on the angle of observation. Communication arrays throughout the facility crackled to life as an alien voice spoke in perfect Zephyrian. Captain Sixra's words were calm, almost conversational, but they carried an undertone of barely controlled fury that made even the bravest scientists tremble. Attention, Zephyrian Research Facility. You are harboring members of our pack against their will. You have 3 of your time units to release them unharmed and present yourselves for judgment. Failure to comply will result in consequences you cannot imagine. Dr. Vextar stared at the communication console, his scientific mind reeling. These weren't simple predators they had captured. They were members of an advanced civilization with technology that made Zephyrian science look primitive. Worse yet, they had declared the facility's actions an act of war against their people. As alarms wailed throughout the complex and his staff looked to him for guidance, Dr. Vextar realized that his career was about to become the least of his problems. Dr. Vextar's hands shook as he activated the facility's emergency communication array, sending a desperate message to Zephyrian High Command. His words tumbled over each other as he tried to explain the impossible situation unfolding around him. An unknown alien civilization with technology beyond their understanding was demanding the release of subjects that the facility had classified as simple animals. The response from High Command was swift and predictable. Under no circumstances were valuable research specimens to be surrendered to alien demands. Admiral Thexkar, commander of the nearest Zephyrian battle fleet, received the distress call with typical military arrogance. In his experience, primitive species often made threatening gestures when their members were captured, but they rarely had the capability to back up their words. He ordered a full squadron of warships to the research facility's coordinates, confident that a show of force would send these unknown aliens scurrying back to whatever corner of space they had emerged from. Meanwhile, in her transforming containment cell, Kira felt the familiar presence of 12 approaching Zephyrian warships through the quantum disturbance they created in space-time. She shared this information with her pack sister through their mental link, along with detailed specifications of Zephyrian military technology that she had gleaned from overheard conversations and computer terminals. The approaching fleet represented the pride of Zephyrian engineering, ships that could level planets and had conquered dozens of star systems. Captain Sixra received this information with grim amusement. The Zephyrians were preparing for a conventional space battle, bringing weapons designed to fight other ships of similar technological level. They had no conception of what they were actually facing. The Voidhounds had been fighting wars when the Zephyrian homeworld was still cooling from its formation. Their definition of warfare operated on principles that younger species couldn't even imagine. The facility's staff watched in growing terror as Kira's transformation accelerated. The containment field that had held her was now visibly cracking, with arcs of unknown energy dancing across its surface. Her pups had grown noticeably larger, and their individual abilities were becoming more pronounced. The electromagnetic pup was now generating controlled lightning that could scramble nearby electronics. The gravity manipulator was causing objects throughout the facility to float randomly. The phase shifter was appearing in multiple locations simultaneously, and the fourth pup seemed to be processing information so quickly that it was predicting staff movements before they made them. Dr. Vextar realized that his facility was sitting on a powder keg that was about to explode. Emergency evacuation protocols were initiated, but the facility's transport systems were being disrupted by the P-Up's growing abilities. Several research teams found themselves trapped in sections where gravity no longer worked properly, while others discovered that doors were phasing in and out of existence, making navigation impossible. The first Zephyrian warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons systems already charging for combat. Admiral Thexkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the strange vessel that hung in space near the research facility. His tactical officers reported readings that made no sense. The alien ship appeared to be generating its own gravitational field, while simultaneously existing partially outside normal space-time. Their targeting systems couldn't get a solid lock on something that seemed to be in multiple locations at once. Captain Sixra watched the approaching fleet with the patience of a predator, sizing up her prey. The Stellar Fang's living hull rippled with anticipation as it prepared for combat. Around her, the other Voidhounds began their own transformations, their bodies shifting into configurations optimized for void warfare. Unlike their pack sister trapped below, they had the luxury of preparing for battle in their natural environment. The first shot fired in the battle came from Admiral Thexkar's flagship, a concentrated beam of energy capable of cutting through starship armor like tissue paper. It struck the Stellar Fang directly amidships and simply disappeared, absorbed by the ship's crystalline hull and converted into pure energy that fed back into the vessel's living systems. The alien ship didn't even seem to notice the attack. Captain Sixra's response was swift and devastating. The Stellar Fang extended what appeared to be crystalline tendrils into the space around it, each one reaching out to touch a different Zephyrian warship. Where the tendrils made contact, the enemy vessels simply began to come apart at the molecular level. Not destroyed in the traditional sense, but unmade, their component atoms returning to the cosmic dust from which they had been formed eons ago. Admiral Thexkar watched in horror as half his fleet was disintegrated in seconds by weapons that operated on principles he couldn't understand. His remaining ships opened fire with everything they had, filling space with enough destructive energy to sterilize a continent. The alien vessel absorbed it all, growing brighter and more solid with each attack, as if their weapons were somehow feeding it. Inside the research facility, the containment field finally failed completely. Kira stood in her cell, now nearly twice her original size, her fur blazing with patterns that seemed to show star maps of unknown galaxies. Her amber eyes fixed on Dr. Vextar through the observation window, and he felt his mind touched by an intelligence vast and ancient beyond his comprehension. She didn't speak aloud, but he heard her voice clearly in his thoughts. "You have made a terrible mistake." The pups moved to their mother's side, their own transformations complete. They were no longer the helpless babies that had been captured months ago, but young warriors ready to follow their mother into battle. Together, the family began to move through the facility, and wherever they went, the very structure of reality seemed to bend around them. Emergency bulkheads designed to contain the most dangerous experiments proved useless against beings who could phase through solid matter, manipulate gravity, control electromagnetic fields, and predict their opponents' actions before they were made. The facility's automated defense systems activated, but their weapons couldn't target entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Vextar and his remaining staff huddled in the command center, watching their facility tear itself apart around them. On the screen showing the space battle outside, Admiral Thexkar's remaining ships were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to view their most powerful weapons as minor inconveniences. The Admiral himself was screaming orders that no one could follow, demanding tactical solutions to a problem that his civilization's science couldn't even comprehend. Through the facility's damaged communication systems, Captain Sixra's voice reached them once more. This time there was no pretense of diplomacy in her words. Your time has expired. You chose to fight rather than surrender what was never yours to take. Now you will learn why the galaxy fears the Voidhound's justice. The lights went out throughout the research facility, leaving only the glow from Kira's transforming fur to illuminate the corridors. In the darkness, Dr. Vextar could hear the sound of approaching footsteps, 5 sets of paws moving with predatory purpose through his dying facility. He had wanted to study the deadliest species in the galaxy. Now he was about to experience their capabilities firsthand. Kira moved through the darkened corridors of the research facility like a living constellation, her transformed body casting shifting patterns of light on the walls. Behind her, the 4 pups followed in perfect formation, their own abilities now fully awakened. The electromagnetic pup, who had begun calling itself Spark through their shared consciousness, sent tendrils of controlled lightning dancing ahead to disable security systems. Phase, the pup who could manipulate dimensional barriers, scouted through walls and bulkheads to identify threats before they could materialize. Void, the gravity manipulator, kept the family moving smoothly through areas where the facility's artificial gravity had failed. And Echo, whose enhanced processing speed allowed her to predict enemy movements, guided them along paths that avoided the remaining security teams. The facility's emergency lighting flickered and died as Spark systematically overloaded every electrical system they encountered. Dr. Vextar and his team, huddled in the command center, watched their control over the station slip away one system at a time. The blast doors that should have contained any breach were being phased through by beings who existed partially outside normal space. The security robots activated by automatic protocols found themselves floating helplessly in gravity-free zones, or torn apart by electromagnetic pulses that their shielding couldn't resist. Junior researcher Thistle, the one who had first theorized about Kira's energy requirements, made a desperate decision. While the senior staff argued about evacuation procedures and distress signals, she slipped away from the command center and began making her way toward the containment area. Her unauthorized observations had given her insights into their prisoners that the others lacked, and she realized that the facility's only chance of survival lay in understanding what they were truly dealing with. Outside the station, Captain Sixra watched the last of Admiral Thexkar's warships surrender after witnessing the complete destruction of their fleet. The Zephyrian vessels hung dead in space, their crews abandoning ship in whatever escape pods hadn't been disabled by the Stellar Fang's dimensional weaponry. The Admiral himself was broadcasting surrender terms, offering to negotiate for the lives of his remaining personnel. But Sixra's attention wasn't focused on the defeated fleet. Through her quantum link with Kira, she was experiencing her pack sister's liberation in real time, feeling the rage and relief that came with freedom after months of captivity. She could also sense something else. Kira had discovered evidence of experiments that went far beyond simple research. The Zephyrians had been attempting to weaponize Voidhound genetics, creating artificial creatures that combined their abilities with mechanical augmentations. Deep in the facility's research levels, Kira stood before a series of laboratory tanks that contained horrors beyond imagination. The Zephyrians had been using tissue samples from her and her pups to create hybrid organisms, twisted combinations of Voidhound DNA and cybernetic implants that were designed to serve as biological weapons. The creatures floating in the tanks were abominations, neither fully alive nor completely dead, existing in a state of perpetual agony that made Kira's own captivity seem merciful by comparison. Her fury, already burning bright, exploded into a cosmic rage that sent shockwaves through the quantum fabric of space itself. Every Voidhound in the galaxy felt her anguish as she discovered what had been done with her genetic material. The pups, linked to their mother's emotions, began to glow with energies that overloaded the facility's remaining power systems. Spark's electromagnetic abilities surged beyond control, sending arcs of lightning racing through the station's superstructure. Phase began shifting the facility itself partially out of normal space, causing sections of the station to become temporarily invisible. Void's gravity manipulation created localized distortions that crushed some areas while leaving others floating in zero-G chaos. Echo's predictive abilities reached such intensity that she began experiencing multiple possible futures simultaneously. Thisall found them in the hybrid laboratory, and what she saw there changed her understanding of everything her people had done. She had known about the experiments, had even contributed data to them, but seeing the results firsthand filled her with a revulsion that transcended species boundaries. The creatures in the tanks were suffering on a level that no sentient being should ever experience, and she realized that her people had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. Kira sensed the young researcher's approach and the genuine horror in her emotional emanations. Unlike the other Zephyrians, this one carried no satisfaction at their work, no pride in their scientific achievements. Instead, Thisall radiated shame, guilt, and a desperate desire to somehow make amends for what had been done. When she stepped into the laboratory, Kira turned to face her, and for the first time in months, her expression held something other than rage. "I tried to tell them," Thisall whispered, her four eyes fixed on the tanks containing the hybrid abominations. "I knew the containment was killing you. I tried to convince them to change the procedures, but they wouldn't listen. They said I was too young, too inexperienced to understand the importance of the research." Through their quantum link, Kira shared Thisall's words and emotions with Captain Sixera. The Voidhound captain felt something she hadn't expected, a glimmer of hope that perhaps not all of the Zephyrians were monsters. Her people had rules about war, ancient codes that guided their actions even in the darkest conflicts. Those who showed genuine remorse, who had tried to prevent atrocities rather than participate in them, could be spared the full weight of Voidhound justice. But the hybrid laboratory represented something beyond mere cruelty. It was an attempt to steal the essence of what made the Voidhounds who they were, to turn their genetic heritage into weapons for conquest. This violation demanded a response that would ensure it could never happen again. Kira approached the control console that managed the laboratory systems, her transformed claws extending to interface directly with the alien technology. What happened next would be recorded in Zephyrian history as the Quantum Purge. Kira reached into the facility's computer, systems not through conventional hacking, but by manipulating the quantum states of the data storage matrices themselves. She didn't just delete the research files. She reached back through time to erase every copy, every backup, every trace of the hybrid experiments from existence. The knowledge simply ceased to be, as if it had never been discovered in the first place. The hybrid creatures in the tanks began to dissolve. Their tortured existence finally ended as the quantum matrix that held their consciousness was gently released back into the cosmic background, from which all life emerged. It was an act of mercy that transcended death, allowing the stolen fragments of Voidhound essence to return home to the quantum realm, where their people's consciousness ultimately resided. Dr. Vextar, watching from the command center, saw his life's work disappear in real time as decades of research data simply vanished from their storage systems. The facility's AI reported catastrophic data loss across all sectors, with files disappearing faster than they could be backed up. Everything related to the Voidhound research was being systematically erased from existence, leaving no trace that the experiments had ever occurred. As the laboratory fell silent, its tanks now empty and its computers purged of forbidden knowledge, Kira turned back to Thisall. The young researcher stood trembling, uncertain whether her attempt at conscience would save her or doom her. Through the quantum link, Captain Sixera made her decision about how to handle this unexpected complication. Someone who had tried to show mercy deserved mercy in return. But the judgment of the other researchers, those who had participated willingly in the atrocities, would be far different. The Voidhounds had rules about justice that were as ancient as the stars themselves, and Dr. Vextar and his team were about to learn that some crimes carried consequences that echoed across multiple lifetimes. The command center's blast doors, designed to withstand direct nuclear strikes, might as well have been made of paper when Kira and her pups arrived. Phase simply walked through the solid metal as if it didn't exist, while Void manipulated the gravitational fields around the hinges until the massive barriers crumpled like discarded packaging. Dr. Vextar and his senior staff found themselves face to face with the beings they had reduced to test subjects and the terror in their eyes was absolute. Kira had returned to her normal size, but her transformation had left permanent changes. Her amber eyes now held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies, and her silver-blue fur moved with patterns that suggested cosmic forces beyond comprehension. The pups arranged themselves around their mother in a defensive formation that spoke of instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. They were no longer the helpless babies that had been captured. They were young predators who had learned to hunt in the corridors of their captor's own facility. Captain Sixra's voice reached them through the facility's remaining communication systems, her words carrying the weight of ancient authority. Pack Sister, the external threats have been neutralized. The judgment protocols are yours to implement. The quantum link between the Voidhounds allowed Kira to see through her captain's eyes, watching as the defeated Zephyrian fleet hung motionless in space, their crews evacuated to avoid the consequences of their government's actions. Dr. Vextar tried to speak, to offer explanations or negotiations, but found his vocal cords frozen by fear. The being standing before him was clearly sapient, clearly intelligent, and had been subjected to months of experimentation that would have driven most creatures insane. Worse, he could see in those galaxy-deep eyes that she understood exactly what had been done to her and her offspring. There would be no mercy born of ignorance here. Echo, the pup whose enhanced processing abilities allowed her to predict outcomes, stepped forward first. Her young voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond the audible spectrum, as she spoke directly into the minds of the assembled researchers. You believed we were animals because we could not speak your language. You never considered that we chose not to. The accusation hung in the air like a physical weight, crushing the last hopes of those who had convinced themselves they were conducting legitimate research. Spark moved to the facility's main power distribution center, her electromagnetic abilities interfacing directly with the energy flows that kept the station operational. But instead of destroying the systems, she began to modify them, restructuring the facility's power grid in ways that Zephyrian science couldn't comprehend. The lights returned, but they now pulsed with patterns that seemed to carry meaning, turning the entire station into a massive communication array. Through the modified systems, Kira began to broadcast her testimony to every Zephyrian listening post within 100 light-years. Her words, translated into their language by quantum manipulation of the transmission frequencies, told the complete story of their captivity. She described the months of starvation, the invasive experiments, the attempt to weaponize their genetic material, and most damning of all, the casual cruelty of beings who saw themselves as superior to those they studied. The broadcast reached Zephyrian High Command within minutes, and the response was immediate panic. The military leadership that had ordered the research suddenly found themselves facing a diplomatic crisis that could destabilize their entire civilization. They had attacked and imprisoned members of a species whose technology was clearly far beyond their own, and the evidence of their crimes was being transmitted across the galaxy in real time. But Kira's judgment went beyond simple exposure. Phase began to demonstrate abilities that redefined the Zephyrians' understanding of physics, reaching through dimensional barriers to access the facility's most secure data storage systems. Every file, every research note, every communication related to the Voidhound experiments was copied and transmitted alongside Kira's testimony. The galaxy would know not just what had been done, but who had ordered it and who had carried it out. Dr. Vexitar watched his career, his reputation, and his freedom disappear in real time as his private communications were broadcast for all to see. His excited discussions about the potential military applications of Voidhound abilities, his casual dismissal of their suffering, his pride in the hybrid experiments, all of it was now public record. The scientific community that had once respected him would view him as a monster, and the legal system that had once protected him would demand his prosecution. Void's contribution to the judgment was perhaps the most sophisticated. Using her gravity manipulation abilities, she began to alter the quantum signatures of everyone in the command center who had participated in the experiments. It wasn't harmful in any immediate sense, but it created a permanent marker that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Any Voidhound they encountered would instantly know what they had done, making it impossible for them to hide their crimes or claim ignorance. The exception was Thisol, who found herself surrounded by a gentle field that protected her from the marking process. Kira had shared the young researchers' attempts to help through the quantum link, and the Voidhounds recognized someone who had tried to act with conscience, even when surrounded by those who had none. Her quantum signature was instead marked with protection, ensuring that any Voidhound who encountered her would know she had shown mercy when others had shown cruelty. As the judgment protocols concluded, the facility's structure began to change around them. The Voidhounds were preparing to leave, but they weren't simply abandoning the station. Using abilities that seemed to violate every known law of physics, they began to transform the research complex into something else, a monument to the consequences of treating sentient beings as laboratory animals. The containment cells where Kira and her pups had been held were restructured into memorial chambers, their walls inscribed with quantum patterns that told the story of what had happened there. The hybrid laboratory was sealed in a dimensional pocket that would serve as evidence for any future trials while preventing the knowledge from being recovered. The facility's databases were purged of all research data except for the records of the crimes themselves, which were locked behind quantum encryption that would last for millennia. Dr. Vextar and his staff found themselves standing in a facility that no longer belonged to them, surrounded by technology they couldn't understand and facing a future where their crimes would follow them wherever they went. The research that they had believed would bring them fame and advancement had instead brought them exposure, disgrace, and the permanent enmity of one of the galaxy's most powerful species. Through the quantum link, Captain Sixra confirmed that preparations for departure were complete. The Stellar Fang had repositioned itself to serve as an escort for Kira and her family, ready to carry them home to the dimensional realm where their people dwelt. But first, there was one final act of justice to be carried out, a demonstration of what happened. To those who dared to cage the children of the Void, the facility's communication systems crackled to life one last time as Kira prepared to deliver her final message to the Zephyrian government. Her words would reshape interstellar law, establish new protections for captured beings, and ensure that what had happened to her family could never happen again. The galaxy was about to learn that some species were too dangerous to imprison, too ancient to intimidate, and too proud to forgive those who mistook their mercy for weakness. Kira's final transmission to the Zephyrian government carried across quantum frequencies that reached every inhabited system in their territory. Her words, translated by dimensional manipulation of the communication waves themselves, resonated with an authority that made even the most powerful politicians tremble. She spoke not just as a victim seeking justice, but as a representative of a civilization that had been watching the younger races with growing concern about their treatment of other species. We are the Voidhounds. Her voice echoed through council chambers and military command centers across Zephyrian space. We have walked between the stars since before your son was born. We have seen civilizations rise and fall, watched species evolve from simple awareness to cosmic consciousness. We have remained hidden not from fear but from hope. Hope that the younger races would learn wisdom before they encountered powers beyond their understanding. In the Zephyrian capital, Emergency Chancellor Vrexna convened an immediate session of the High Council. The evidence streaming from the research facility painted a picture of atrocities that violated every treaty their civilization had signed. Worse, they had unknowingly declared war on a species whose technology made their most advanced weapons look like primitive tools. The political implications were staggering. Public opinion was already turning against the government that had authorized the experiments. The Pups, no longer children, but young warriors hardened by their experience, took their positions around their mother as she continued the transmission. Spark's electromagnetic abilities amplified the signal, ensuring it reached even the most remote outposts. Phase manipulated dimensional barriers to broadcast simultaneously across multiple realities, making the message impossible to suppress or deny. Void's gravity manipulation created resonance patterns that embedded the words directly into the quantum structure of space itself, ensuring they would persist long after the transmission ended. Echo's predictive abilities guided the timing, ensuring maximum impact on public opinion and government decision-making. Your researchers believed they could study us like simple animals, Kira continued, her mental voice carrying overtones of cosmic fury. They failed to understand that what they saw as docility was actually restraint. We allowed ourselves to be contained because we were curious about your species, wondering if you might join the community of truly civilized races. Instead, You prove that you are still driven by the primitive urges that characterize the youngest species. The need to dominate, to exploit, to reduce the unknown to controllable categories. Captain Sixra, monitoring the transmission from the stellar fang, felt pride surge through the quantum link as her pack sister delivered judgment with the authority of their ancient people. The Voidhounds had protocols for dealing with species that proved themselves unworthy of contact, but they also had provisions for those who might still learn wisdom. The choice of which path the Zephyrians would follow now rested with their response to this moment. Dr. Vexitar and his remaining staff listened to their victims pronounce sentence on their entire civilization, realizing that their actions had consequences far beyond their personal careers. The research they had conducted in pursuit of military advantages had instead brought their people to the attention of entities who viewed them as dangerous children, playing with forces they couldn't comprehend. The quantum marking they now carried would identify them to any Voidhound they encountered for the rest of their lives, ensuring that their crimes would never be forgotten. Thaisal, protected by the mercy she had shown, found herself appointed as witness to what happened next. Kira turned to her, and through quantum manipulation of their brain patterns temporarily granted her the ability to perceive reality as a Voidhound did. The young researcher gasped as her consciousness expanded beyond the three-dimensional space she had always known, allowing her to see the true scope of the beings her people had imprisoned. The Voidhounds existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions. Their consciousness spread through quantum realms that intersected with normal space at specific points. What the Zephyrians had captured was merely the tiny portion of Kira that existed in their reality, like trying to study an ocean by examining a single drop of water. The full extent of her being stretched across cosmic distances, connected to a civilization that spanned not just galaxies but entire parallel universes. You will serve as our voice to your people, Kira told Thaisal, the mental communication carrying layers of meaning that normal language couldn't express. You will tell them what you have seen, help them understand the magnitude of their error. Your species stands at a crossroads. You can choose to evolve beyond your current limitations, or you can be classified as a threat to galactic stability. The choice is yours, but you will not be given another chance. The facility around them began to phase shift as the Voidhounds prepared for departure. The research station, transformed into a monument to their suffering, would remain as a reminder of what happened when sapient beings were treated as experimental subjects. But more importantly, it would serve as a test of Zephyrian character. Would they preserve it as a lesson about the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition? Or would they try to destroy the evidence of their crimes? Through quantum manipulation of space-time, Kira opened a portal that connected the facility to the stellar fang. The energy requirements for such a feat were enormous, requiring the coordinated efforts of all 5 Voidhounds to bend reality itself to their will. Dr. Vextar watched in awe and terror as beings he had considered simple animals casually violated the fundamental laws of physics that governed his understanding of the universe. As Kira and her family prepared to step through the portal, she delivered one final message specifically intended for the Zephyrian leadership. We have watched 12 species destroy themselves by choosing conquest over cooperation, domination over understanding. We will not allow a 13th to threaten the stability of this galaxy. Reform your ways, establish protections for all sapient beings, and prove that you can grow beyond your current limitations. Fail to do so, and face the consequences of being classified as a galactic threat. The portal closed behind them, leaving the research facility in dimensional flux as reality struggled to reassert itself around the space they had occupied. Emergency systems throughout the station worked frantically to restore normal physics, while the remaining staff tried to comprehend what they had witnessed. The beings they had studied for months had revealed themselves to be so far beyond Zephyrian understanding that the comparison was like bacteria attempting to study quantum mechanics. Thaisal found herself alone with the quantum knowledge that Kira had temporarily shared, her mind reeling from the implications of what she had learned. The Voidhounds weren't just another spacefaring species. They were gardeners of reality itself, ancient beings who guided the development of younger races while remaining hidden from their view. The Zephyrians had stumbled into contact with cosmic forces that operated on scales their science couldn't even imagine. Emergency Chancellor. Rexna's voice crackled through the facility's communication system, demanding updates on the situation and explanations for the impossible sensor readings their ships were reporting. But the real crisis was just beginning, as news of the Voidhound testimony spread throughout Zephyrian space and beyond. Allied species were demanding explanations, while enemies saw opportunity in their exposure and humiliation. The transformation of the research facility was complete, its corridors now serving as a living museum of the consequences of treating sapient beings as experimental subjects. The quantum patterns embedded in its walls would tell the story of Kira and her family to anyone who visited, ensuring that their suffering would not be forgotten. But whether it would serve as a lesson learned or a monument to Zephyrian stubbornness remained to be seen. In the depths of space, the Stellar Fang began its journey home, carrying Kira and her family back to the dimensional realm where their people waited. But their mission was far from over. The Voidhounds now faced the decision of whether the Zephyrians could be guided toward wisdom, or whether they would need to be contained before they could threaten other species. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see which path the younger race would choose. 6 months after the Voidhound liberation, the galaxy had transformed in ways that few could have predicted. The Zephyrian research incident, as historians would later call it, became the catalyst for a fundamental shift in how spacefaring civilizations treated captured or unknown species. The evidence broadcast by Kira had reached every corner of known space, forcing governments to confront uncomfortable truths about their own xenobiology programs. Thesal stood before the newly formed Galactic Ethics Committee, her quantum-enhanced memories serving as testimony to the true nature of the beings her people had imprisoned. The temporary expansion of consciousness that Kira had granted her had left permanent changes. She could now perceive dimensional shifts that indicated Voidhound presence, making her uniquely qualified to serve as an intermediary between species. Her account of the facility's transformation had become required reading in xenobiology courses across dozens of worlds. The Zephyrian government, faced with overwhelming evidence of their crimes and the threat of cosmic-level consequences, had undergone the most dramatic political transformation in their recorded history. Emergency Chancellor Vrexna had dissolved the military research division entirely, establishing new protocols that required consent from any sapient species before contact could be initiated. The scientists responsible for the experiments faced tribunals that would determine their fate, while Dr. Vextar remained in protective custody, as governments across the galaxy demanded his extradition for war crimes. But the most significant change came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after Kira's testimony, dimensional distortions began appearing throughout Zephyrian space. Not the violent tears in reality that marked Voidhound anger, but gentle ripples that seemed to test their sincerity. The Stellar Fang materialized near their capital world, its crystalline hull reflecting the light of their sun in patterns that spoke of cautious hope rather than impending judgment. Captain Sixera's message to the Zephyrian leadership was brief but momentous. Your response to our sister's testimony has been observed. Your willingness to reform suggests that wisdom may yet bloom in your species. We offer a chance for your people to prove they can grow beyond their current limitations. The offer that followed would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The Voidhounds were willing to share limited knowledge with species that demonstrated genuine commitment to ethical treatment of all sapient beings. The first Zephyrian delegates to board a Voidhound vessel returned with technologies that seemed like magic to their people, medical devices that could heal at the cellular level, communication systems that operated through quantum entanglement, energy sources that drew power from the dimensional barriers between realities. But more importantly, they brought back philosophical frameworks that helped their species understand their place in a universe far more complex and interconnected than they had ever imagined. Kira and her family had returned to the Voidhound homeworld, a realm that existed in the spaces between dimensions where the boundaries of reality were fluid and malleable. Her pups, now recognized as heroes among their people, began their formal training in the ancient arts of dimensional manipulation and cosmic stewardship. Their experience in captivity had given them unique insights into the mindset of younger species, making them valuable assets in future contact situations. The research facility where they had been held became a pilgrimage site of sorts, with representatives from hundreds of species visiting to study the quantum patterns embedded in its walls. The story told by those patterns served as a powerful reminder of the consequences of treating sapient beings as mere specimens. Several governments established similar memorial sites where their own past atrocities were documented, beginning processes of reconciliation that had been delayed for centuries. Dr. Vextar, his quantum signature forever marked by voidhound justice, found himself in the unexpected position of becoming a cautionary example rather than a criminal. The voidhounds had decided that his punishment should serve as education rather than simple retribution. He was required to travel throughout Zephyrian space, speaking about his experiences and warning others about the dangers of reducing sapient beings to experimental subjects. The quantum marking ensured that any attempt at deception would be immediately detected by voidhound monitoring systems. The broader implications of voidhound contact rippled through galactic society in ways that no one had anticipated. Species that had been dismissed as primitive were re-evaluated through new frameworks that recognized forms of intelligence beyond conventional sapience. First contact protocols were revolutionized to include safeguards against the kind of assumptions that had led to Kira's imprisonment. Most significantly, the existence of ancient species like the voidhounds forced younger civilizations to confront their own technological and philosophical limitations. Thistle, her enhanced perception allowing her to serve as a bridge between species, established the first Institute for Multidimensional Ethics. Her research focused on developing frameworks for interaction with beings whose consciousness operated on scales beyond conventional understanding. Students from across the galaxy came to study under someone who had witnessed cosmic justice firsthand and lived to document its implementation. The Pups, now young adults in voidhound terms, occasionally returned to conventional space to serve as observers and guides for species attempting to evolve beyond their current limitations. Spark became known for her work with civilizations struggling to understand electromagnetic consciousness, forms of sapience that existed as patterns of energy rather than biological matter. Phase specialized in helping species cope with the discovery that reality contained far more dimensions than their science had revealed. Void worked with gravitational anomalies that turned out to be ancient forms of distributed intelligence, while Echo used her predictive abilities to help prevent conflicts between species operating on vastly different temporal scales. The Stellar Fang itself became a mobile embassy, appearing wherever its presence might guide younger species toward greater wisdom. Captain Sixra found herself in the role of cosmic diplomat, helping to establish new frameworks for interspecies cooperation that recognized the vast differences in consciousness, technology, and philosophy that existed throughout the galaxy. Her people's ancient role as hidden gardeners of civilization was finally revealed, though their full capabilities remained carefully concealed. Years later, when the Galactic Ethics Committee published its comprehensive report on the Zephyrian research incident, it included a footnote that few readers fully understood. The Voidhounds had revealed that the galaxy contained at least 7 other ancient species like themselves, cosmic gardeners who had been watching the development of younger civilizations for millions of years. The treatment of Kira and her family had served as a test of galactic readiness for broader contact with these hidden powers. The galaxy had passed that test barely. The swift response to reform research protocols, the establishment of new protections for captured beings, and the genuine remorse shown by many species for their past actions had convinced the ancient powers that the younger races might yet develop the wisdom necessary for true cosmic citizenship. But they would be watched closely, and future transgressions would carry consequences that made the Voidhound response look gentle by comparison. In the end, what had begun as a story of captivity and cruelty had transformed into something far greater. An awakening of consciousness that forced an entire galaxy to confront the ethical implications of their actions. Kira and her family had become more than victims seeking justice. They had become catalysts for the evolution of interspecies ethics and the first ambassadors between the ancient powers and the younger races, struggling to find their place in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. The fox-like beings who had been treated as simple animals had revealed themselves to be teachers, showing the galaxy that true power lay not in the ability to dominate others, but in the wisdom to guide them toward their own greatest potential. The age of hidden gardeners was ending, and the age of conscious cooperation between all sapient beings was finally beginning.